Okay, yeah, thank you. Firstly, I'm Matt Burns-Williamson, the Police and Crime Commissioner for West Yorkshire, and welcome to this community outcomes meeting. And for obvious reasons, due to the ongoing restrictions around COVID-19, we're actually undertaking this meeting as a video platform meeting, so we're recording it on Skype. And accordingly, we have altered the agenda really to concentrate on some of the very current issues around offering some reassurance, particularly to some of our BAME communities, and of course the whole response to COVID over the past few months, and just to share some of the work and initiatives that myself and West Yorkshire Police have been undertaking during that time. In terms of the meeting itself, we normally have an agenda item around the previous notes of the meeting. We're not really going to touch on today because of the current situations, but they will be finalised and published in due course. So item 2 on the agenda is referred to as urgent items, and just before I introduce the Chief Constable, clearly we know, don't we, that it has been a really challenging time for all communities since March, from when the restrictions were put in place in terms of trying to prevent the spread of the virus, and more recently, of course, we've had the events over in America, the death of George Floyd, and the Black Lives Matters protests and issues that have arisen as a part of that. So we very much wanted to explore those issues in particular, and hopefully we can provide some reassurance and answers today. And to that end, we did publicise the fact that we were undertaking this meeting and requested members of the public to submit questions, which I'm pleased to say you have done, and we'll be covering some of those as we go through this agenda. So at that point, I'd now just like to introduce the Chief Constable for West Yorkshire, John.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. John Robbins, Chief Constable for West Yorkshire Police.
Thank you, John. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for this community outcomes meeting. So, as I've touched on in terms of that opening statement, I just wanted to touch on the recent statement that the National Police Chiefs Council have issued regarding the work that they intend to undertake around addressing issues of diversity and some of the issues falling out of the Black Lives Matters and the George Floyd incident in America. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Obviously, all Chief Constables across the United Kingdom have come together and signed up to the joint statement by the National Police Chiefs Council. But from a West Yorkshire context, to be clear, from the outset, there is absolutely no place for discrimination, bias or racism within West Yorkshire Police. But sadly, society is not free from those things, and I suspect every public sector and private organisation is not wholly free from those. But in policing terms, it is important that the public do have confidence in us and confidence in us to tackle and confront those issues, and importantly, to listen to their experiences. You know, Commissioner, that we've got very long-standing and well-established neighbourhood policing teams within West Yorkshire, and they're at the forefront of our engagement. But dealing specifically and straight to the point about the very sad death of George Floyd in America, I have to say I am heartened by his brother and by his family in the midst of their grief, how they've called for unity and non-violence. And the humility that they've shown is outstanding. We saw the widespread disorder in America, and very sadly, we've seen some disorder in London and other cities. As you're well aware, Commissioner, thankfully we haven't seen any in West Yorkshire, and local frontline police officers have recently received some very positive feedback in the way in which they've policed protest recently here, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But whether we like it or not in West Yorkshire, what happens in America does affect policing across the Western world, and therefore the perception and the indications of violent, unjust and unfair policing over there do reflect and cast a dark shadow over here. So on one hand, Commissioner, I do want to say that British policing is different. We're in a different place to our colleagues abroad. We truly police with consent of our communities. We put neighbourhood policing here in West Yorkshire at the front of everything we do. And I see and you see those positive engagements every day across West Yorkshire. But on the other hand, let's be upfront about it, British policing has been judged in the past to act in a manner that has been perceived as unfair, unjust, insensitive, biased and institutionally discriminatory and institutionally racist. So in today's police service and today in West Yorkshire, whilst we might not recognise those events of the past, we might not recognise the events from across the sea, we do understand and can see the lived experience of people and how the past has shaped the current. And therefore it is important now that I as a Chief Constable set the right standards of behaviour, approach and policing style along with my chief officers. So it focuses one's minds both within communities and within policing about how we police here in West Yorkshire. And it also sadly focuses the minds of people about, in particular, those people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, people of colour. It focuses their minds of how we in policing are looked at, how we are seen and how we are judged just for being in policing. So I know that every West Yorkshire police officer and every West Yorkshire police staff is determined to get things right, that they have shared values with our communities, the communities we police. But I've ensured over the last few weeks that they've been briefed and instructed that they must keep talking, keep engaging, keep listening to our communities, really listening to communities. And we've done this because we know that what happens with our frontline officers, how they treat individuals, will dictate what happens in policing over the coming months and years, specifically the actions and reactions of response officers, roads policing officers, operational support, neighbourhood officers. Their actions will dictate how we are seen in West Yorkshire over the coming months and years. But frontline officers and staff, commissioners, you know, do an incredibly difficult job. They understand their effect upon communities. They understand their effect upon BAME communities. But they now more than ever need to understand the effects of their actions and their words. And they have a tightrope to walk in many occasions between protecting the public and also policing with consent in some of the most difficult and challenging environments. So I would say that the front line, as well as deserving our support, they deserve our overwhelming respect, but they have had a very clear message from me about being professional, treating people with respect, about being decent, about being caring, and increasingly around how we see our organisation going forward in terms of its own diversity. So I'll finish with a simple message really to the communities of West Yorkshire, is that officers and staff, as a result of events nationally and internationally, are still here for policing you, for policing our communities. Our neighbourhood policing teams are at the forefront of everything we do. Those local officers are visible, accessible, approachable, and most importantly, Commissioners, you've seen many occasions in West Yorkshire, they're local police officers policing in local communities with an understanding of the local challenges for people, and they know and understand their communities now more than ever so in the policing career of West Yorkshire. So I think that covers a few events, but I'll return to where I started. There's a national statement, there's a unified approach from policing and an absolute determination from Chief Constables that this is a critical moment in policing and we need to get things right and improve things going forward.
Thank you for those comments, John, and that response. And as you know, we've been in close contact throughout the entirety of the COVID period. and indeed recent weeks as well, following that, like you say, the absolutely senseless death of George Floyd. And like you, absolutely condemn any racism in our communities. It's unacceptable. It won't be tolerated, and quite rightly, we should always challenge that. I was really pleased to see that statement that came out from the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, Martin Hewitt, and I know that you supported that at the time, as did I through my own national organisation, the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, and myself and my colleagues are absolutely committed to working with you and our communities through the various networks, through all contacts we have, the councillors, the MPs, working together to ensure that we have a frank debate around some of these issues and address whatever injustices we can as a result of that. We know there's a lot of work to do. We have made a lot of progress, I think, in recent times, and there are big differences between the style of policing in the US as opposed to England and Wales. But as I've just said, we know there's a lot more to do, and indeed I'm going to come on to some of those questions that start to look at different aspects of that. And the first one that's been sent in is you might be aware of some comments that the Chief Constable of West Midlands, Dave Thompson, has made recently, who has said that he recognised that his force was not free from bias, discrimination or even racism. Is there anything more you would like to say in relation to the West Yorkshire position?
I think anybody in policing or public sectors, or indeed in the private sector, must agree that I don't think any organisation that is self-reflective, learning, could unanimously say and declare that it's free from bias, discrimination and racism. There's many different contexts and many different terms, and as you're well aware, we've put a significant amount of training, awareness and understanding for our staff. But what I will say is that racism has absolutely no place within policing, and we have professional standards departments whose sole objective is to root it out. We've got complaints processors who give the opportunity to the public to bring things forward, and we've got a training regime that's based on organisational learning to ensure that where there are biases and unconscious biases, they're confronted, they're addressed and they're explained. And I come back to neighbourhood policing and our policing style being at the forefront of all that we do. And I genuinely believe that that's why the good relationships locally with members of our black community, our Asian community and our BAME communities have in the last few weeks been strong and have shown that we haven't had the difficulties of cohesion that some areas have had. But yeah, I completely agree with my colleague, and that's supported within the National Chief's statement that you referred to, Commissioner.
Thank you. And again, just to re-emphasise that we thank not only the police for the way that they've obviously policed those recent peaceful protests in parts of West Yorkshire, Huddersfield, Leeds and Bradford and other parts of West Yorkshire, but also the way in which those protesters have undertaken their activities in making sure that we haven't seen some of the scenes that we saw in London and elsewhere, which that is also totally unacceptable in terms of officers being attacked or assaulted, and none of us want to descend into that sort of situation. So I thank the police and our communities for the way in which that's been done so far. And as you say, neighbourhood policing, as you know, I'm a huge advocate of and have promoted that for a number of years, and I know they've been playing a key role during this period, but for quite a long time. So I think we can both agree that neighbourhood policing will continue to form the bedrock of the style and what we do, working with our communities at the very local level. Another question that's come in, it's just in relation to stop and search figures, and as you know, we have in place something called Operation Gemlock, which is the West Yorkshire Police response to the knife crime aspect that was introduced last year, with some additional funding that we secured via the Home Office. And it was really just to get from you, John, how that's impacted potentially on the overall stop and search figures, and some of that disproportionality which we know exists, but perhaps you could explain a little bit more detail behind that.
Thank you. So just for clarity, as you've said, Commissioner, Operational Gemlock is the police operation to combat knife crime and the use of knives on the streets of West Yorkshire, and most importantly, the harm caused by knives and violence and offensive weapons on the streets of West Yorkshire, and harm against all communities, young black men and boys, young Asian men and boys, and young white men and boys. So it's our proactive operation. It's not related at all to anything around COVID-19 response, and it's not being related to anything at all to do with the Black Lives Matters or George Floyd's sad death. It was running for some time before, and is a proactive operation that sees us focusing on where those crimes that most harm communities occur, in order to prevent those crimes from occurring. So the good news is the success of Gemlock, and I say that very clearly, that knife crime is down by 268 offences, robbery is down by 578 offences, robbery with a sharp implement, a knife, is down by 156 offences, hospital admissions for people injured with knives or sharp objects are down by 10%, as is serious violent crime by 10%, as is knife crime by victims for young people under the age of 25 is down by 13%. Homicides are down by 20%, robbery is down by 14% in total, and those robberies with sharp implements in terms of numbers is down by 20%. So it's significant reductions in harm to people across West Yorkshire. And that's been enabled by deployments into those hotspot areas, into areas where crime has just occurred, and into areas where there's clear intelligence that there's emerging threat of crime. So it's very specific, following the harm and following the crime. The transparency of all that we do is that we publish our data, that we do everything we do on body-worn video now. All of the supervisors and sergeants scrutinise every single stop search, and they also look at the body-worn video. On top of that, the dedicated Gemlock supervisors also have ensured that their staff have had unconscious bias training and have had community engagement awareness training to understand the effects upon their actions within those communities. The impact of Gemlock is an increase of stop search by about 10 or 11%. However, of those stop searches that have been undertaken by the Gemlock staff, targeting crimes, targeting the hotspots, targeting the reduction in offences, we are seeing an increased disproportionality to the standard stop searches. So during Operation Gemlock, there are more people from a BAME background being stopped than there are through the normal stop search activity of policing. And this is one of the dilemmas of policing, in that we've brought down harm to people, we've brought down knife crime, but in the statistics, there is disproportionality. And I might add that, of course, we're now working with academia, local analysts, and other people to look through and understand what that means. The early positive indicators are throughout all of those stop searches, we haven't had one public complaint, but I do understand what some members of the community would say about that as well. So the scrutiny is in place, the training is in place, the awareness is in place, the action is occurring, the outcome is positive, but there is disproportionality. There is a whole host of more work to do to understand that, to overlay geography, socioeconomic, street-based populations, offender profiles, intelligence information, community-based information, so that we can greater understand it. So there is, in summary, an impact on disproportionality through Genlock, but there is also a positive impact upon the communities of West Yorkshire.
Yeah, thank you for that. And sorry, I just wanted to make clear as well that the questions that I'm asking under this section are definitely ones that I've sort of put forward, but they are informed from comments we've had in from the public. So I'm just trying to reflect some of those wider issues that have been raised within these questions. And one of those is aside from the street population, what other factors impact on disproportionality in West Yorkshire, and are those discussed with officers?
Yes, definitely. I suppose with all activity, there's a huge scale. At the very worst end, which I don't believe there is within our stop and search, there's racism, i.e. the deliberate and malicious targeting of individual. Let me make it clear, I do not believe there is that in our stop and search figures. There is discrimination, there is potentially unconscious bias, there's then offender and offence-based information, the street populations, the socio-economic, there's poverty-based information, there's needs, harms and risks, and there's advantages and disadvantages within society. So we look at it in as many different ways as we can. We also look at it in terms of gender, and as I've said many times before, Commissioner, there is huge disproportionality in terms of more men and boys are stopped than women and girls. We look at it in age, and there's huge disproportionality in that more young people are stopped and searched than older people. And of course, we look at it through ethnicity, and there is disproportionality in our stop search in that more BAME people are stopped and searched than the resident population. But we're now, as many forces and organisations have been doing, is to work through different elements to see how we can look at it through. But to ensure that we're compliant, we train the College of Police in approved professional practice on stop search. We implement HMIC recommendations. We take feedback from the scrutiny that you provide over the force as well, Commissioner. We take unconscious bias training and have delivered that to frontline staff. And we take academic and independent research and community-based groups where they've got information they can provide to us. We're as keen to understand this data as anybody. We're keen to understand the disproportionality and what it means in compared to demographics, crime, data, demand. And we're keen to understand how we deploy our resources in relation to this. So there's a whole host of factors within it, but the most important one for me is to ensure that there isn't discrimination and bias and a deliberate stop searching of certain members of our community. And that's where the oversight, the scrutiny comes in. And ultimately, as you're well aware, Commissioner, we have stop and search scrutiny panels where members of the public are invited in to watch the body-worn video, as well as ride-alongs where people come out with us on stop and search. And we publish all of our data each year under a equalities publication. And I believe it's our intention to jointly publish further data in the future because I think it's incredibly important the public see what we're doing and that we're open and transparent to that scrutiny.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I know we've already discussed, haven't we, looking at a more detailed breakdown, if you like, around some of these aspects. So I know that work is underway. You might have already touched on this, but again, it was just how we sort of monitor and respond to any community tensions that may arise, and you know, and what things we are doing to address that where it does have the potential to occur.
So in a more formal element, we have daily community tension monitoring where intelligence, analytics, information, social media and information coming into policing is analysed and judged around the feeling of tension within communities. Still more formally, we have things called force, equality and human rights assessment and community impact assessments after significant incidents within communities. But most importantly, we use our frontline staff, officers and staff out in communities, speaking to key individual networks within voluntary sector, within education, within health and housing, local authorities, within charities, within community-based groups, to engage with, to speak to understand how people are feeling, what tensions there are within communities, what people are commenting on, and what information there is, whether that be as a result of the sad murder of George Floyd, or through BLM protests, or through counter protesting, or through specific incidents within communities. We're keen constantly to get engagement, information and transparency out. So each of the 5 districts has community engagement plans, and they're broken down into areas and into wards to work alongside ward councillors and other public sector officials in those wards. And as I've said, they engage with a whole host of groups, as I said at the beginning, to ensure that we're listening and we're understanding what people are saying to us, because that can enable us to then give a better policing service, a more responsive policing service. So we don't get everything right all of the time. We're not perfect in all that we do, but we're definitely listening and monitoring tensions, feedback, to ensure that we can get our policing style right and be in the right place at the right time to support communities.
Yeah, no, thanks. And clearly all of us have got a role to play in that as well, around working with local groups, councillors, voluntary sector, third sector, and certainly, I've had a number of conversations with some of those individuals and groups. And again, I'd like to thank all those groups that have, already started some of that work, and in some circumstances just, kept things on an even keel in some of our communities. Because, as we know, we do police by consent in this country, and that's a really important aspect that we should never forget. Again, you have to some extent touched on this around the reassurance around training and decision making when it comes to use of force, and what improvements have been made since the last report that came to this meeting to complete the data sets that we have.
Yeah, so again, the use of force by public officials is a breach of people's human rights. There's not many organisations or people within society who have the ability to use force upon other members of the society. In policing, it's necessary, and it's in most occasions appropriate and right and just. However, we've got to make sure we get it right every time, that it's not only legal, but it's necessary and it's proportionate to what we're seeking to achieve. And that's where some of the tension and some of the issues comes in people's perceptions of police proportionality. And again, we don't get it right all of the time, and we're subject, and quite rightly, to very rigorous complaints procedures and organisational learning procedures that people are reviewed and they're dealt with if they've done things they should not have done in accordance with their training, whatever level they will be dealt with. If they need feedback, development and support, that occurs too. I'm confident that within West Yorkshire Police we've got some of the most robust, documented, progressive use of force training in the country. We have some extremely skilled, dedicated trainers, and we are constantly putting people through situational and awareness training, as well as engagement, diversity, equalities, unconscious bias training as well. So we base much of our actions on the national decision-making model, and all officers are trained in the use of that and how that works through. It's a publicly accessible document. We're bound, and we constantly train operationally in an environment of the Code of Ethics as to the standards and rights of people. We also have a use of force programme and the use of force continuum, which moves from open hand skills, speaking to members of the public, all the way through the continuum of force in the terms of proportionality. We have the standards of professional behaviour that every police officer and police staff member is subject to and knows about. We have human rights training, we have unconscious bias training, and I'm pleased, as many forces are doing now, we have body-worn video at the forefront of everything we do, so that it's very clear to the public, to the officer, to the organisation, to communities, exactly what's done, and we can see both the violence and the unjust attacks upon police officers, but also the behaviour of police officers and staff, the proportionality of what they're doing, and most importantly, the use of force. So alongside closed-circuit television, body-worn video, in-car audio and video, we're getting now a documented, recorded picture of the use of force by police officers and staff, because yet again, there are elements of disproportionality in it, and whether that's in relation to biases or discrimination, we're working our way through. But I'm content, as I've said, that we've done as much as we possibly can around the training and awareness, as well as a scrutiny, review and oversight. And I'm looking genuinely forward to what other advice and guidance will come nationally over the coming months and years around use of force and what more needs to be done to show our transparency for it. But as I said at the very beginning, police officers and staff are put in very difficult situations and dangerous situations on occasions. However, they must always act proportionately and justly and rightly in all circumstances.
Yeah, no, thank you. And as you've touched on there, I mean, reports on this information are already available, and we've covered them in previous accountability meetings. But as you've just said there, that in light of recent events and the work that's now underway at a national level, both through the NPCC and the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, I think we will look again, I think, just regarding how we publicise that information around the stop and search, the use of force, issues around deaths following custody, those types of issues. And it's really just communicating with our communities, reviewing everything that we do, and being open and transparent about those things. And that is the best way, in the end, in my view, to address these things, to have those open and robust debates with members of the community to address issues and have a better understanding around all the work and everything that is going on. I think I just also wanted to add that we know that the census data is about 10 years old now, and I think we're told that there's a new census to be carried out next year. And again, I think that's a really important piece of work around better understanding how communities have changed over that past 10 years or so, which hopefully will give us a more accurate picture to make that analysis around the data that we do collect. But I just wanted to mention that, because I think it is an important context in looking at all this as we go through. So again, I know that we're looking at a more detailed piece of work on all of those aspects, and we will be making that available very shortly as well. So the agenda now just moves on to the Police and Crime Commissioner announcements, and I've got a few things to say under this item. Firstly, as I said at the outset on the public questions, thank you to everybody that did take time out to submit questions. We've had a number of those. Those are quite detailed as well. So if we don't manage to answer all of them today, we will be making sure that there is a written response to the questions, and I'm sure we'll cover some of that as well in the next item around the COVID-19 update as well. So I just want to reassure everybody that's written in that we will endeavour to make sure there's an answer to those questions, whether it's on this meeting today or in writing. But as you can imagine, there's been a fair bit of work to do behind the scenes on that. I also just wanted to touch on some things that that myself and the office have initiated very recently, and it's important. Again, we've launched something called the Community Conversations, which is a survey to try and establish how members of the public are coping during this COVID period. That's still currently open until the 29th of June. I think so far, in terms of some of the general comments that have been made, there are some worries around the interpretation of the restrictions and the relaxation of those. And of course, we heard more about that yesterday. But I think we're all desperately wanting to avoid any second spike or flare-ups of the COVID-19 in our communities, because we know there's been some real hardship and tragedies that have occurred through loved ones that have passed away as a result of that. So I think it's just to get that message out there that the social distancing is still really important. And we have heard regarding reports around the extra vulnerabilities for those in BAME communities, whether that's working on the front line in the NHS or in other services, but obviously within communities as well. So, none of us want to see those vulnerabilities being exacerbated any further. So, yes, clearly we know about some of the announcements on the relaxation, but I think we all need to play our part still in the doing sensible things around the social distancing. Also pleased to say that we launched the latest Safer Communities Fund grant round during this period. That was launched on the 14th of April. And just to remind everybody that this is funding that is made of the proceeds of crime monies that the West Yorkshire Police and prosecutors do some excellent work to ensure comes in. But I did make this as a key commitment when I was elected as Police and Crime Commissioner to ensure that a lot of this funding was put back into our communities. So we decided to introduce an extraordinary grant round to tackle issues such as domestic and sexual abuse, addressing mental health issues, drugs and alcohol and fraud, all things that we know have had a heightened concern during this period. And particularly looking at how groups could offer support online or over the telephone, and looking at real community-based solutions in addressing things like antisocial behaviour as well, into trying to reduce demand on policing and other services. Pleased to say that following a speedy and robust evaluation, we have now awarded 32 grants across West Yorkshire to different groups and projects, totalling a figure of just short of £175,000. And a number of those successful projects obviously do cover those areas that I've highlighted around mental health, domestic and sexual abuse, child sexual exploitation, and clearly we'll be looking for those projects to deliver over the next few months in what is still going to be a really challenging environment. But obviously there's some really good projects there, working with women and girls, young people, children and vulnerable people across all ages. So well done to those organisations that were successful, and thank you to everybody in my office that moved quickly to ensure that's been put in place. This week is Safeguarding Week, and some of you may have seen that West Yorkshire Police, myself and the office and many of our partners in local authorities are taking part in a number of initiatives, both affecting adults and children. And again, I think it's a real statement of intent from partners in West Yorkshire that we're all determined to tackle the issues that I've just mentioned, but also, of course, with the added challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic. So please, look out or have a look at the different projects and work that's been done during this week, but it is very much aimed at making sure we carry out safeguarding work throughout the year, not just in Safeguarding Week, but obviously this week is a chance just to concentrate people's minds and highlight all the good work that's underway. Also, really pleased to announce that this week will be when we do launch our new Sexual Assault Referral Centre facility, otherwise known as SARCS. It's a purpose-built facility in the heart of West Yorkshire. The work on it started in late 2018 and will house a number of specialist services. The project timeframe has been slowed a little because of the COVID situation, but again, everybody's been pulling out the stops to try and ensure that it is launched and delivered this week. In my view, this will take these types of services to a new level, housing both children and adult services under the same roof for the first time. It's due to open later this week on Friday the 26th. It will also incorporate video live links to courts for vulnerable victim suites, where video recorded interviews can take place, waiting rooms, a specialist hub where our independent sexual violence advisors can also be housed as well, in providing that really critical support to vulnerable victims. And obviously the whole aim of this is not only to have a state-of-the-art facility, but it's also to increase and give confidence to those that have suffered these awful crimes in coming forward and knowing that they will have the best of support in doing that. And it certainly, again, it's a long-term vision that I've had since I was elected into this role in 2012. It's been a pretty long journey, but again, I'd like to thank all our partners, West Yorkshire Police, NHS England, the Court Service, and all our victim support services in helping to get us to this point. And obviously, we'd have all loved to have been there in person to do the launch this week, but I think the main thing is that the facility will be open by the end of this week, and it will then start taking referrals victims. So again, a huge thank you to everybody that's worked so hard to bring us to that point. But we will be saying more about the announcement in other media releases this week as well. Just to finish off on this item, clearly, as well as the public questions that we've been asked members of the community to send in, I also carry out a regular casework facility within the office, and that's again really important in understanding some of the key issues from members of the public and the survey responses again that I mentioned earlier, which does inform the discussions not only for these meetings but all the other accountability conversations that I have with the Chief Constable and West Yorkshire Police. And indeed it will also influence the refresh of the police and crime plan that we will be undertaking over the next couple of months as well. So it's just really mentioning that wider context of where we gather our information from, which is really important.